Congressman Schock, what do you hear from the Vice President? Is that political vulnerability?
You know what? I hear a lot of negativity, and what strikes me as disingenuous is all the attack on Republicans as do nothing. As in his third year now in the United States Congress, I will tell you, last year was the first year since 1974 that a Democratic House failed to pass a budget. We got a majority this year, and we didn't just criticize what the President rolled out in his budget. We actually did our own budget. As a Republican House that did entitlement reform, something that was the unthinkable, that bend the cost curve, that put us on a projection towards balance as a country. And guess what, David? It got more votes. Republicans and Democrats voted for that budget than any budget that passed the Congress in the last 10 years. And in addition to the budget, we've passed 100 bills in the House that are sitting in the Senate waiting for action. And so to hear the Vice President say that he doesn't have an equal partner, or that somehow the House and the Republicans are just do nothing, is not only a political statement, it's just not factually correct.
Congressman Gutierrez, has the conversation stopped in Washington? Are we effectively in the campaign argument right now?
I think, look, when I got to Congress, I wanted to change it. So I put legislation to freeze every member's pay. That was one thing to change it. I think we have a new set of congressmen that have come really to burn the House down. And I think that that's unfortunate. Let's talk about this partnership. So we passed health care reform. They want to call it Obamacare. It's health care reform. We didn't get any help. We had to restructure Wall Street and go after Wall Street to make sure that our financial system was safe. We didn't get any help. When it came to our environment and energy policy, we didn't get any help. And I'm sorry, but we keep hearing, I mean, it's simple to be a Republican these days because there's two answers to every question. Blame Obama, and if not that, cut the budget, until it comes to cutting for the rich oil producers here in this country. There's no cutting, or cutting the military. Look, right. We need to have a conversation about putting Americans back to work, and we need to have that sense of urgency that there are people hurting out there.
Look, this is the debate, Mark Halperin, that's playing out on the campaign trail now, and we're going to turn to get a sense of where this Republican race is here at the end of this week. First, this is the way the field looks right now. According to the new CBS News poll, it's Romney, Kaine, and Perry, 17, 17, and 12. Herman Cain in the top tier week after week. New Hampshire is the early primary state, even we don't know exactly when they're going to be voting next year. Romney has a more commanding lead there, 37%, Cain at 12. Look at Perry down at 4%. Christie is out of the race. Palin is not going to run. Where do things stand?
There's the same dynamic that's existed going through Christie, going through Palin, going through all the people who decided not to run. The same dynamic exists in this race as existed from the beginning. Mitt Romney's going to be a finalist, and then there's a question of who fills that vacuum. Republicans want someone who's tough on the president, they want someone who can get elected, and they want someone who will promise fundamental change in the economy.
And your take here, Romney is up. How do you see him at the end of the week?
Well, he's still the strongest in the field by far. He's still raising money. He's still checking off different constituencies. I think he's found his voice, the Values Voters event in Washington over the weekend. He's found his voice on being an anti-Obama spokesman pretty effectively. What he still lacks, though, is the broad appeal that Republican frontrunners in the past have had.
Rick Perry, a draw at this point.
He's got to define himself better than he has. He's been defined by his position on immigration in Texas, by his position on Social Security, not by his position on jobs and the economy, which he's going to talk about on Friday finally in Pennsylvania, and defined by his personal story. The country doesn't really know Rick Perry, and so far he's not been as strong as candidate as he thought he'd be. But Rick Perry's advisors and Mitt Romney's advisors agree. Rick Perry will be back. He will have a second chance. He needs to define himself better.
Herman Cain is an up arrow.
He is filling that vacuum, the anti-Romney vacuum. As strong as Romney is, he's clearly the strongest. There's a huge hunger in the party for somebody else. And until somebody steps up besides Herman Cain, he's on the economy, he's got a tax reform plan. He's got a strong anti-Obama message, and he's promising that fundamental change. His problem's electability. It's very hard for him to get over that hurdle.
Let's talk about Bethany McClain, the political economy. Here was the Wall Street Journal headline this week as these Occupy Wall Street protests are here in Chicago, they're in New York, they've been in Los Angeles. This is how the Journal puts it. Democrats' populist puzzle is the headline. The Democratic Party grappling with the promise and peril of the anti-corporate populism, the Occupy Wall Street movement, seeking to tap its energy without opening the party to charges of class warfare. I won't play this particular soundbite from the Vice President from our interview this week, but he said, look, there is this broken trust between the middle class and between the haves on Wall Street who are much healthier in this economy? How do you see it?
There's a lot to protest. You can pick your economic statistic to show that we've degenerated into a society of haves and have-nots. There's no question about that. But the problem is our economy has been broken for a long time. The credit bubble just masked problems that have been growing for decades. We need a way to tackle this over the long term. And you can look at the protesters and say they're chaotic, they're disorganized. And the great irony is Washington really much better? And a lot of this populism, whether it's bank bashing or taxing millionaires, it distracts from the fact that we have a really hard road ahead. We need a long-term plan for the economy that we want that's going to work for wide swaths of people. It's not going to be easy. So little Twinkie-sounding sound bites are unsatisfying.
You made a point about the banks when we talked this week, which is we got to decide what we want our banks to be. We got bank fees that are driving people crazy now, and the bankers say, hey, wait a minute, you passed financial regulation that made it more restrictive for us to make money here. We're still going to try to make money because that's what we do. We have to make a decision, in your view.
Right. If you're mad at the banks and you want a different financial system, then let's talk about having a different financial system. But let's not just do this sort of mixed message of business as usual plus popular bashing that in the end it's like a Twinkie. It sounds good at the time, it really tastes really good, but it's ultimately really unhealthy. It doesn't get us anywhere.
Why is demonizing Wall Street the right approach right now? It may be a political strategy if the president can harness it. Is it really the right thing to do for the economy?
Well, here's what I think. With all due respect to everybody's opinion, there was $700 billion in TARP. I was there. The money got to the banks. They were on their knees. I don't remember anybody from Goldman Sachs or J.P. Morgan Chase saying, don't do it, Luis, don't do it. We really don't want the money. No, I saw the Secretary of the Treasury come down there each and every day begging and imploring us. And you know what? They got their money. And what did we get? We got a bill for $5 if you want to access your money. So let me just say, it's not bashing, it's looking at the reality. And I think that's part of the frustration and the anger of people who can't send their kids to school, who can't send them to college, who don't have a job, who are losing their mortgages. So all I want to say is, I take on my own Secretary Geithner this week, and I said, Mr. Secretary, we put $50 billion. We gave the bank $70 billion. Guess what? They got their money. We set $50 billion so that people could modify their mortgages and reduce their payments. Guess what? 2% of that money went out to consumers in America. So, yeah, people are angry because government is dysfunctional and it's not working.
But here's the reality. The protests, Congressman Schock, are also about the fact that the middle class is not getting any better, not getting healthier.
You're exactly right.
I mean, middle class wages are stagnating. What is your party doing to deal with that disparity?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say Bethany made an excellent point. Everyone's focusing on whether you support the protesters or don't support the protesters. Why are they protesting? It's because we have failed to implement economic policy that allows more opportunity for more Americans and for the pie economically in this country to grow. And what we have to have is pro-growth policies. To your point, what are Republicans doing in the House? We've been doing a whole host of things. First of all, passing a budget that deals with entitlement reform that bends the cost curve so there's a confidence in Washington, D.C. that we're going to deal with our debt crisis as a country. Second, passing over 100 bills that are waiting for action in the Senate, things that are regulatory reform, reining in some of these EPA changes, one just this week on cement companies that would put nearly 20,000 Americans out of work that are currently working if the EPA is not stopped from this regulatory change.
Mark Halperin, let me ask a political question as well on both sides of the aisle. The president's calling himself an underdog. The vice president has spelled out in my interview the vulnerability. David Axelrod, the president's communications advisor, said this will be a titanic struggle for re-election. When I asked Mayor Emanuel, what's he do to get his swagger back? Because this is not the guy who talked about yes we can and had people crying, you know, when he was elected because there was such great expectation. People feel let down.
Well, look, it's a false choice to say he's just going to go for the base and reject the middle or vice versa. He needs to do both if he's going to get reelected. He needs his base to be energized. He needs people in the middle to like and respect him. He needs more of the business community, including in the banking sector where they're very mad at him now, to be at least open to his reelection. He must wait for a Republican opponent. These are two well-meaning public servants, but they're talking past each other, as is the conversation in Washington likely to be, except for that super committee you talked about with Rahm Emanuel. There needs to be, and Paul Ryan, there needs to be some dialogue because we can't wait till 2013 to address the concerns of both the Tea Party and the Occupy Wall Street.
We'll take a break here. When we come back, I also want to follow up on whether religion is a new issue in the GOP primary. We'll do that. We'll take a break here, but I also want to tell you about Press Pass and our 2 extra Meet the Press conversations that you can